Harvey Shapiro was educated at Yale and Columbia. He was a founding editor of Yale Poetry Review, later named Poetry New York, and in the early 1950s, an editor of Epoch. His poems have been widely published and collected in several volumes, including Battle Report, 1966, This World, 1971, and the most recent volume, Lords, 1975. He is the book editor of the New York Times Book Review. Some of you may have seen in this week's issue his front-page article titled A Conversation with Jimmy Carter, in which we are informed that one of the president's favorite poets is James Dickey. I wish I had known that before I voted for him. Harvey Shapiro's poetry has received high praise. The poet George Arpin, writing of Battle Report, said that these were poems of great emotional investment and complex awareness. They derive from a clear and even orderly intelligence. They are capable again and again of projecting with great calm and lucidity, and frequently a bright light of wit, a poignant awareness of vitality. There are many such quotations, and I would like to add just two remarks to them. One is that, in a very natural and unstrained manner, Harvey Shapiro's poetry combines two different traditions. The first is Hebrew themes. The second, the tradition of American poetry, experimental modern American poetry, as exemplified by William Carlos Williams. These are points of reference, but his style and his subjects are all his own. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Harvey Shapiro.
Thank you, Louis. Actually, I wanted to do something to get publicity for this evening's reading, so I went to the White House, and I guess the president wanted publicity for his own reasons, so it worked out very well. Let me begin with some local poems coming out on the Long Island Expressway, which is a road I know fairly well. I passed Utopia Parkway, and it reminded me of a poem in my book Lords called Riding Westward. This was a return trip poem a couple of years ago. It's holiday night, and crazy Jews are on the road, finished with fasting and high on prayer. On either side of the Long Island Expressway, the lights go spinning like the twin ends of my talus. I hope I can make it to Utopia Parkway, where my father lies at the end of his road, and then home to Brooklyn. Jews' departure from the law is equivalent to death. Shades, we greet each other darkly on the Long Island Expressway, where I say my own prayers for the dead, crowded in Queens, remembered in Queens, as far away as Brooklyn. Cemeteries break against the city like seas, a white froth of tombstones, or like schools of herring, still desperate to escape the angel of death. Entering the city, you have to say memorial prayers as he slides overhead, looking something like my father approaching the ark as the gates close on the Day of Atonement, here in the car and in Queens and in Brooklyn. This is a North Shore poem called The Bridge. I have to say that I've spent a lot of my life on this island. I live in Brooklyn now, and I've lived in Brooklyn for about 20 years. My family moved from New York to Woodmere, Long Island, in the 30s during the Depression. That's when people moved to the suburbs in those days because they couldn't afford to live on Riverside Drive or West End Avenue. And so I spent my growing up years there. I spent lots of summers on the North Shore of the island around Peconic and Southold. And this particular poem, The Bridge, is dedicated to a friend of mine, John Wiseman, who was born in Southold and who teaches high school there. He's a painter, a watercolorist, and a very good one. And I have some of his paintings in my home in Brooklyn. And I identify with him somewhat as a local artist, though I probably do myself too much praise when I do that. And I wrote this at one point some months ago, feeling my career was coming to very little, which is a mood that comes on me every now and then. There's a reference, there are a couple of Brooklyn references in the poem, one to the Long Island Historical Association, which is a couple of blocks from my house, a library that has some marvelous drawings of the opening of the Brooklyn Bridge. And of course there are lots of references to the bridge and to Crane by implication in this poem. The Bridge for John Wiseman. John, the old bunker fleet at Greenport is a ghost. Many beautiful things are gone. The masts, the dockside buildings, float in your blue watercolors, blue and black, in Brooklyn, where I seem to be giving up the ghost. Artists of the region, all one island, Whitman's crummy, fish-shaped island. Like you, I do the indigenous stuff, crabs from the creek, blues from the September sea, poems from the tar roofs and the red brick library where they house the prince, opening the bridge. Fireworks and exaltation, crowds moving in a mighty congress back and forth, while we, unmoving on the starry grid of America, stare failure in the face, our blazing star. It was a dream of summer. From the cliffs above the sound, hummingbirds hovering, red foxes at the door. At evening, I could see the schools of blues come in, savaging the waters and the bait. Everything I wrote was magic to me. Ancient days. Believe me, John, they wear us down with shit and work, but one pure line, still mine or yours for the grasping, can take us to that farther shore. As I say, I've spent a lot of my life on this island, and I've known a lot of poets here. Mr. Simpson talked about my allegiance to the experimental school, and I guess George Oppen, who lives some blocks, a couple of blocks from me in Brooklyn, is the poet I felt closest to. Oppen and Reznikov, and who's now dead. Poets of the objectivist school. I started my writing as a somewhat more formal poet, and that's, as we all know, a kind of natural progression for poets I'm 53, for poets of my generation. And since I have an hour to read in, I'll take this opportunity to read one or two long poems. This goes way back, and this is a poem called Battle Report. It's a somewhat formal poem written about my experiences in World War II. That was the war between, the United States and Germany, Japan. And it grows out of my experiences as a gunner and radio operator in B-17s. I flew 35 missions over Germany and Austria. There were some, as you know, very good poems that came out of that war. Louis Simpson wrote some of the best. Randall Jarrell, I suppose, wrote the very best. Jarrell has a poem called The Death of the Ball Turret Gunner. And it's a 3 or 4 line poem. And the last line, I think, is when he died, they washed him out of the turret with a hose, the ball turret, which was on the underside of the B-17. And I first heard that line when I was in gunnery school in Utah. And the sergeant, the gunnery instructor, who was back from the 8th Air Force, was talking about the ball turret gunner, and he said frequently when the planes come back, they wash him out of the turret with a hose. And Jarrell picked that up undoubtedly in the 2nd Air Force, the training Air Force. He'd never been overseas. I mean, the short point of that long story is that he didn't go. He was not in combat, and he wrote the most effective poems of the, I think, coming out of that war. Anyway, here's my poem. It's in several sections, 7 sections, short sections. I praise an age that has no monuments, that if millions die within a war, a few I knew, a few I saw go down, they die forever, and what's to be said? It is always a prayer to the remembering muses. Remember me, remember through all time that I sing this. You who write the genealogies, and the spirits crowd around without number. The Adriatic was no sailor's sea. We raced above that water for our lives, hoping the green curve of Italy would take us in. Rank, meaningless fire that had no other object but our life raged in the stunned engine. I acquired from the scene that flickered like a silent film new perspective on the days of man. Now the aviators, primed for flight, gave to the blue expanse can after can of calibers, armored clothes, all the rich paraphernalia of our war. Death in a hungry instant took us in. He touched me where my lifeblood danced and said, the cold water is an ample grin for all your 20 years. Monotone and flawless, the blue sky shows to my watching face this afternoon the chilled signal of our victory. Again the lost plane drums home. No violence rode in the glistening chamber. For the gunner the world was unhinged. Abstract as a drinker and single, he hunched to his task, the dumb show of surgical fighters, while flak, impersonal, beat at the floor that he stood on. The diamond in his eye was fear. It barely flickered. From target to target he rode. The images froze, the flak hardly mattered. Europe rolled to its murderous knees under the sex of guns and of cannon. In an absence of pain, he continued, the oxygen misting his veins like summer, the bomber's long sleep and the cry of the gunner who knows that the unseen mime in his blood will startle to terror years later when love matters. My pilot dreamed of death before he died. That stumbling Texas boy grew cold before the end and told the bombardier who told us all, we worried while we slept. And when he died on that dark morning over Italy in clouds, we clapped him into dirt. We counted it for enmity that he had fraternized with death. From hand to hand we passed in wonderment the quicksilver of our lives. In the blue oxygen what I saw, my valve fluttering its song, my ears tight to the static. I perceived that I was rocked in the body of the plane. Rarefied air frosted my lashes. Congealed breath sparkled my scarf. So gloved and shooted, wired into my bones, I rode the day. Austria, an ant's plan underfoot. In that perilous seat above cities, I mixed into my own breathings and waited, exposed as a stone. Sunlight through plexiglass above my head was light without sun, a blue wash of cold. This I recall, seated in my room, having sloughed off the glory and the pose, that place where the oxygen faltered and the mask of my face went closed, and they pried me sleeping from the sea. Walker underwater, can you believe that even now the sun touches that phalanx of fins, the vectoring forts? It It is mainly cold, I remember, and the warmth when my mask, clotted with breath, grew dark. I turned my rubber face to the blue square, given me to trace the fighters as they weave their frost, and see within this sky the traffic fierce and heavy for the day. All those who, stumbling home at dark, found their names fixed beside a numbered fort, and heard at dawn the sirens rattling the night away, and rose to that cold resurrection, and are now gathered over Italy. In this slow dream's rehearsal, again I am the death-instructed kid, gun in its cradle, sun at my back, cities below me without sound, that tensed corrugated hose feeding to my face the air of substance. I face the mirroring past. We swarm the skies, determined armies, to seek the war's end, the silence stealing, the mind grown hesitant as breath. I suppose one of the things that comes out of the war experience for me and that works in a lot of my poems is the concentration on breathing, on the ability to breathe. If I had to say I've been asked at various points in my writing career why I was writing poetry, I would say because I want to learn how to breathe. And it had to do with the kind of forced breathing, the oxygen being fed to you through a mask in those B-17s. And breath, and that notion of breath, runs through my work. And I felt later on that I had achieved something when I could write, my own breath is hidden in the universe. Why should I concern myself? It rises and falls with all the others, so that I find it easy to begin. I want to turn to a book published in 1971 called This World that I know a few of you know. And the book begins with an opening section about the muse and about love and about women. It was partly written out of a feeling that there were some debts I had to pay off. The first poem was for William Carlos Williams, and it has to do with my seeing him at several times in his life. One when he was still a very active man. This was in Yaddo in about 1949, and then later, he suffered a series of strokes before he died. And this last scene is with his wife Flossie when I met him in a hotel lobby. I think it was for the National Book Awards. And he was broken and afraid to be left alone, as the poem says very clearly. The poem comes out of several sources. One, it comes out of I guess it's a poem in a part stolen from other poets. It comes out of something that Ted Weiss told me once about. We were talking about Williams and Robert Frost in their old age, and Frost was in marvelous shape in his old age, and when he was completely barnacled over, there's no way of reaching him. He read marvelously and performed marvelously, but he wasn't writing any poetry. And Williams, who was quite shattered and broken in his old age, was writing some of his most beautiful poetry. And that's one source of the poem that I can remember. Another source is an argument that I had, I think it was in East Hampton with David Ignato. I don't know when this was, in the 60s. And David was concerned about, I guess, his own career and what was happening to American poetry, and thought that the problem was that the homosexuals had taken it over, the faggots had taken it over. And he said Williams should be here to drive them all out or something like that. And so that's another source of the poem. Anyhow, that's an elaborate explanation for a very simple poem. For WCW. Now they are trying to make you the genital thug, leader of the new black shirts, masculinity overall. I remember you after the stroke, Which stroke? I don't remember which stroke. Afraid to be left by Flossie in a hotel lobby. Crying out to her not to leave you for a minute. Cracked open and nothing but womanish milk in the hole. Only a year before that, we were banging on the door for a girl to open to both of us. Cracked, broken, fears slaughtering the brightness of your face, stroke and counterstroke, repeated and repeated for anyone to see. And now, grandmotherly, you stare from the cover of your selected poems, the only face you could compose in the end, as if having written of love better than any poet of our time, you stepped over to that side for peace. What valleys, William, to retrace in memory after the masculine mountains, what long and splendid valleys. Thank you. I'll read some more poems from this section of this world. This is a poem in several sections called Days and Nights. You keep beating me down. When I reach a balance, you break it, always clawing for the heart. In the electric light, we face each other. Whatever you want of me, goddess of insomnia and pure form, it's not these messages I scratch out morning after morning to turn you off. Whether I had room for all that joy in my economy is another matter. Rejecting me, she shut out all my light, showed to me the backs of houses, tail lights going fast, smiles disappearing. Every man was my enemy. So it was for many a day. I could not climb out of it. So close was I to her will. He that is wise may correct nature's alchemy, the philosophical stone, your shadow over the page, your head on my cheek, your eyes great riding lights in the alcoholic storm that now I remember, along with that bruising sweat of rhetoric I thought appropriate to the times. He that is wise may have his life to remember, but I am reduced to reciting the letters of the alphabet. If I say them with fervor, saying them with fervor, will memory be stirred? Your own goddess voice in the leaves, in the night of the body as I turn the page. Well, it was only Bottom's dream. Methought I was, and methought I had. Outside, the sky is a field in which the seeds of minerals shine. And I am hunched over the board on which I write my nights, breathing configurations on the winter air, as far from you as ever I was far from you. The cold locks everything in place. Now I am here, the flame of my match, everything that is given to me. Suddenly I see your face close up, and all my senses scramble to get the shock home again, in sleep, not knowing who I am, or however that spent match struck. The white brilliance under the eyelids, so that all things appear to me in that color. The worlds you see exist in joy, eyes like doves, equilibrium, a white brilliance. Now you come again, like a very patient ghost, offering me Zen records, a discourse on the stomach as the seat of the soul, your long white neck to kiss. The tiger's eye, that is your favorite jewel, shines in your hand, wanting to, I can't conjure you up, not a touch. Unbidden, you cross 1,000 miles to say, this is the gift I was going to give you forever. While other cases lean away from the nominative, The poet is giving the girl large roses. They are blood-red roses. They require no prepositions as they come through to the girl, become the girl's face and body, and holy blood red are fixed in the nominative like a pulse. The light is sown. It is there under the stones that have been flung on the street. Behind my house now, it is in full flower. The leaves of the mimosa are edged with light. This is the gift I have and do not claim. If I could take the world like that, all things to which the light adheres, your body edged with light, which I claim and count on and lose and claim again. This is called by the Women's House of Detention. Louis Simpson remembered visiting me years ago when I lived in Patchen Place, in the village which was then right across from the Women's House of Detention. And that awful structure no longer exists. That's one of the things that happens to you in New York, you know, if you live long enough and you write poems about the city and places in the city, you have to sort of footnote what the poems are about. I have lots of poems about Paramount Theater and poems that need to be footnoted. This needs to be footnoted. Anyhow, I would wake up in the morning and hear the prostitutes and the pimps shouting to each other Sunday morning by the Women's House of Detention. Love is the beggar's itch, and I depart past the stockaded women, tier on tier, singing the same song through their delicate home. Sundays, the colored lesbians lean in the street and cry up to the latticed windows love's old sweet song. Happy in these streets I see out of some dark cellar Orpheus lead Eurydice, while past me goes young Icarus, his red heart bleeding like a sheep in the fall from perpetual music. This summer, like a jungle, I dream in a confusion of chairs as love over the ancient city flares like an angel's eye. Sir Thomas Wyatt, when she cries out, I hear her from my darkness. Words collide, but what shakes me is her tongue coming to find. I remember that one of my favorite poems these days is that someone quoted it to me the other day. It's a Ted Kooser short woman poem, which goes like this. Get your tongue out of my mouth, I'm kissing you goodbye. It's a marvelous American poem. Cardiac zombies under the Miami moon. Memories of you and your spade lovers coming in from the sea now. That Buddha shake you give to your head when I look at you. In the Himalayan hills, you've answered the phone. I hear you say, I'm real, the only live one in the amphitheater of the sea. In the Museum of Antiquities, I ran my hands over the breasts and thighs of the young Aphrodite and heard her say, kiss my ass. He thought of himself as in the service of a lady or of the moon, though in truth he was in the service of a style that was trying to grow hands and feet, and so had need of him, and filled his life. Oh, I'll read a few more poems from this world. Every morning I look into the world and there is no renewal. Every night my lid's clamped. I concentrate on the renewal to come. I am on the lookout for a great illumining, prepared to recognize it instantly and put it to use, even among the desks and chairs of the office, should it come between 9 and 5. That the galaxy is a river of light, that the order of seeds is in my hand. I ask to enter this world without confusion. The enormous lights and mysteries of this world, which the teacher says I shut from myself with a hand, spending my sight on these snarled lines, this closed-in town where I walk and work and find you in sleep, in the dark room, the dark town, in a life that I cannot honestly call the way. He has been asking for help everywhere for his child with the clogged tongue. Not that the boy should speak with eloquence, but that he should speak his need to the world, the citizens, the barest speech. I am happy, I am sad, the sense is beautiful. The reader begins with the destruction of the city. It is the same tune every day for a week now, but how he appears to enjoy that rattle of words, crowds fleeing, others looting shops in the most expensive avenues of the city, smoke like a cowl over the words and the reader's body. He must experience it to the end each day as it was set down from the roots of heaven. In the sequence, the angel of each verse stands like a point of flame. This is called the Synagogue on Cain Street. And it's a synagogue a couple of blocks from my house. And it's the oldest synagogue in Brooklyn. Which is now empty, or I guess it's now, I've left it, but I guess it's enjoying a resurrection, but a renaissance. But I remember, I guess spending on the Jewish high holy days, there's the Kol Nidra night in which pledges are announced from the audience for the synagogue. And I remember this night, all these pledges were announced from the podium by the rabbi to this empty congregation, and they were from all these places on Long Island and Connecticut, and the sounds of the money of this lost congregation. The synagogue on Cain Street. Anachronisms are pleasant. I like shifting periods, as the young rabbi doesn't shift tones, saying the ethics of Maimonides and the Reader's Digest. There is no reason for survival. As we drift outward, the tribal gods wave farewell. It is the Mother Synagogue of Brooklyn. We are a handful in a cathedral. When I was asked, I said the blessing for the reading of the scroll almost correctly. The reader had a silver pointer. The parchment before me was like a beginning. Oh, enough of that. I read some poems from Lords, which was published in 1975 by a small press, Sun Press. And maybe a few poems from this, and one or two new poems, and then one or two old ones. I hear the music from the street every night, sequestered at my desk, my luminous hand finding the dark words, hard, very hard. And the music from car radios is so effortless. And so I strive to join my music to that music, so that the air will carry my voice down the block, across the bridge, through the boroughs where people I love can hear my voice, saying to them through the music that their lives are speaking to them now, as mine to me. What distinguishes our work is an American desperation. Who thought to find this in the new world? I owe my father a tribute. On his last day, when the head nurse asked what he wanted, he said, "I want to look into the eyes of a young girl, the eyes of a young girl. I want to look into the eyes of a young girl." It's nothing to me who gathers us in, and it's nothing to me who owns us now. I can think of Venice or Jerusalem. Armand's little goat beard quivers in the spring. It suddenly strikes me that at 46, I want to write the lyrics of a boy of 20, so I blow my brains out. Not wanting to invent emotion, I pursue the flat literal, saying wife, children, job, over and over. When the words took on emotion, I changed their order. In this way, I reached daylight about midnight. I wish I had never been born, he shouts at 6, a pure despair. At 46, I cannot say that with honesty. Pure passion is beyond me. Everything is mixed, grief allied with joy, that he is able to say it. In October, the house is chill. Still, a cricket of summer sings, reminding us of promises. As long as the heart listens, it pumps blood. That's what was written when I was younger. She has a kind of grainy beauty, like one of those square-thumbed, slab-footed Greek maidens of Picasso. So when I see her, I think of sand and sea. My life on the empty beaches is just starting to come back. All the way home, we sang songs of the 40s and 50s, reeked with class, and the kids broke up. Sometimes they worry about the desperate way I drive. There are these distances. I have several poems about children, my children, who aren't really my children anymore. I'll read one called Saul's Progress. I told my son, stop trying to screw the monkey's tail into his belly button. Originality is never its own justification. Some innovations get nowhere. The Sunday monkeys are my friends, he said. I was on my way down from the heavenly city of the 18th century philosophers. He was on his way up, almost 3. Moby Dick is smarter than the other dicks. A song to make the bad guys happy. You sang it all day Saturday with snot-filled nose and clouded eye to raise me to a fury. You sit on the crest of a dune facing the sea, which is beyond sight. Your anger at me makes you play by yourself, tell stories to yourself, fling out your hurt to the wide skies healing. A red boat in one hand, a blue in the other. You begin singing songs about the weather. Cliff, swallow, brilliant skimmer. As if he were me, he comes bounding in, all happiness. I owe him all happiness, for these years at least. When he smiles and says, a good time, I have no notion who else he is made happy with my happiness. Different kind of poem about children called Bringing Up Kids. He goes into paroxysms of grief. I am baffled by his non-communication, knowing perfectly well everything his rage means to the shaking house. Disorder at night. It is natural. He wants to know why it is right. Well, I'll read one last poem from this, called Musical Shuttle. It's a poem that goes back to, it's also, God knows, a Long Island poem, but it goes back to my reading Walt Whitman when I was an adolescent. And it's my remembering myself reading Whitman, which was the first music I heard, I think, really, from the page. Musical Shuttle. Night, expositor of love. Seeing the sky for the first time that year, I watched the summer constellations hang in air. Scorpio, with half of heaven in his tail. Breath, tissue of air, cat's cradle. I walked the shore where cold rocks mourned in water, like the planets lost in air. Ocean was a low sound. The gatekeeper suddenly gone, whatever the heart cried, voice tied to dark sound. The shuttle went way back then, hooking me up to the first song that ever chimed in my head. Under a sky gone slick with stars, the aria tumbling forth, bird and star. However those cadences rocked me in the learning years, however that soft death sang, of star become a bird's pulse, of the span distances where the bird's breath eddied forth, I recovered the lost ground, the bird's throat bare as the sand on which I walked. Love in his season had moved me with that song. Let me go to one or two new poems before I finish with some old ones. This is a poem about remembering jazz in the 30s and 40s and 50s. I spent a lot of my life, that part of my life, listening to jazz music. And, well, I remember in this poem, in those days you could go to the Village Vanguard and for the price of a pitcher of beer on a Saturday afternoon, you could sit all afternoon, and everybody who was in town, any musician who was any good would come in for a jam session. And there are references to Nick's Bar and to places on 52nd Street. I've never done much with my love for that music. I used to try to put that music into my writing, and I don't think I ever succeeded in doing anything with it. Tight Like That. Who can refuse to live his own life? A spray of leaves in the lamplight. A saxophone on the dark street like the 40s. In those days, for the price of a pitcher of beer, you could spend Saturday afternoon listening to the exchanges, the deep guttural stirrings of so much light and dark. At the break, at the downbeat, we saw Billy draped in fur, gardenia in her hair. Bless you, children, she said. Whatever became of the music I drank to at Nick's Bar, Pee Wee Russell's clarinet jammed into Brunus's belly, shaking like his sister Kate. Hunkering down into my own story, I begin to see it all close up, just under the pavement. Well, here's another kind of family poem called Now. The house smells of young cunt, laughter in the upstairs hall. Age weighs on me as I sit through it. My son's quick step hurrying over me to the John. The Union Street Bridge spans in 3 steps the Gowanus Canal. I had no notion of community crossing it, cursing those on this side, then the other, the tenements in a rose-red light, the stoops and petty alibis, the Gowanus flaking red, dead water. My heart was in my mouth once again. Drive the car was all I knew. I could ricochet from shore to shore of America, high on sunsets, honoring the poets. Not enough. I have these visitors, dog and cat, my way of relating to God. Crying, they come to me to be assured of my presence. Whatever their natures, they have this need which I can satisfy, putting a hand on their throat. As if I were my own enemy, I eat clippings of my hair, beard, and nails, and go forth to seize the house, wife, and job of the man I have inhabited, ashes in my mouth. Playing the lyre of the spirit in Brooklyn on a winter night, animals about me, the house asleep, the tree of life swaying as I play outside my window in the sodium glare. "47th Street. In the delicatessen, the countermen were bantering about the Messiah, lifting the mounds of corned beef and tongue. He wouldn't come, they said. You couldn't count on it, meaning they would die in harness. They put their eczema in the sun, arms and scalps hanging loose in the broad street. The hope for healing never very distant from this populace. If one had to define their politics, it would be this. Easter, the sun risen on the slowly abandoned city. They are prepared to give it all away, having nothing. Tropical music for the carnival, carried at the ready, mused the old Jew. When Elijah's face appears on the screen between the commercials, who of us will not open the door? Father and sons. If you tell them something truthful about themselves or about life, coming across it in the middle of a rambling discourse, how solemn their faces grow. Domestic matters. It wasn't what I had thought, children taking up most of the house, leaving me, or so it often seems, only room enough for the bed, which itself is a kind of relic from an earlier marriage. And so you turn in the bedroom door, white and so small, to say goodnight, to say there are 2 of us. I am crying over this body of yours, which is to wither in the dust. Already your belly's thrust out points your breasts. The hair of your head grows thin. A skeleton smiles to me with your gums. We are almost out of earshot of one another. Yet our answers seem to find connected questions of an urgency so deep they might be coming from the center of a life. The cry of the small rabbits facing death. Nobody would want to sing like that. A short, high wailing. So what if death gave them voice to sing? I face my own rage and fear, tearing for words that I can say calmly and sentences that will not stop. I want to see the next line glitter and the last come crashing like surf. For the Zen master skateboarding down Independence Pass. This grows out of a trip through Colorado last August. The upturned soles of Buddha's feet. He was not himself anymore. That happiness. Mind racing the green hills, blue mountain daisies. Freedom of the downward glide, swallow's wings, overdrive. Knees bent for the turn as the mountain turns. And this is some of my poems come out of readings in Zen, and some come out of readings in the Hasidic masters, and some come out of both. So. Early Sunday, under the phosphor glare, birds sing merrily. Twigs bud. A dream pushed me from my bed, breathing of promise like this April. Believe me, said the teacher in my dream, a single true gesture, if it be only that of the big toe, is enough. Let me close with a few poems from Battle Report, which is a book of selected poems I published in 1966. It has a whole section of poems on Hebrew themes that I won't have a chance to read, but that are among the poems I like best of my work still. This is called Pastime. I believe we came together out of ignorance, not love, both being shy and hunted in the city. In the hot summer, touching each other, amazed at how love could come like a waterfall with frightening force and bruising sleep, waking at noon, touching each other for direction out of ignorance, not love. The Night the Old Nostalgia Burned Down is the most beautiful title in American writing. Every night I visit it, crammed full of heroes, blondes, girls out of my own childhood and the neighborhood. Tenderly I light the flesh and watch it go like dreams. Mother and father burning down to the sweet music of Stephen Foster, hymned in the PS3 assembly. Every day is a new beginning. The charred remains softening the scent of bleak December. Background music against which crisscross rapid images of a new life. I leave the scene confident the spectacle has enduring worth. Will light me a long way. Songs to sing. My last poem is called National Cold Storage Company. It's a poem that's been reprinted a number of times. It's a poem I wrote on the Brooklyn Promenade about several days after the assassination of President Kennedy, John Fitzgerald Kennedy. I lived opposite the National Cold Storage Company. It's a warehouse, and I lived opposite it for years and never knew what to make of it until this night, walking towards it, seeing it under the bridge, as if it were under the bridge. It's right by the bridge. I wrote this poem in my head. It's one of the few poems that I've done that way. And of course, it's about history, and it has to do with Hart Crane. And it has to do with what I felt was going to happen and come out of this assassination in this period. And it has to do with a nation that does not, the trouble a nation finds itself in when it does not live through its own traumatic experiences, like the trouble we all find when we ourselves put something in, freeze something in a kind of cold storage, and then later on in our lives, it thaws and takes strange shapes and controls us in ways we would not like. The National Cold Storage Company contains more things than you can dream of. Hard by the Brooklyn Bridge it stands in a litter of freight cars, tugs to one side, the other the traffic of the Long Island Expressway. I myself have dropped into it in 7 years, midnight tossings, plans for escape, the shakes. Add this to the national total, Grant's tomb, the Civil War, Arlington, the young president dead. Above the warehouse and beneath the stars, the poets creep on the harp of the bridge. But see, they fall into the National Cold Storage Company, one by one. The wind off the river is too cold, or the time's too rough, or the bridge is not a harp at all. Or maybe a monstrous birth inside the warehouse must be fed by everything, ships, poems, stars, all the years of our lives. Thank you very much. Thank you. Your watch is still there.